Good evening, dear ones. We'll begin our Kirtan just after 7, so just in a minute or so, and we'll meditate before then. Let's offer a prayer now. You can repeat silently as I say these words out loud. Divine Mother, Heavenly Father, beloved friend, God, great masters of self-realization, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswarji, beloved Guru, Paramhansa Yogananda Ji, all saints and sages, beloved Swami Kriyananda Ji, with our heart's devotion, we invoke your presence and your blessings. Sing through our hearts, our voices, our lives, a divine melody of perfect love, of perfect joy, that we may bless everyone we meet. Help us to uplift those around us and to be one with thee. Om. Peace. Amen. So, dear ones, we will share some chants with you this evening and some stories of our time with Swami Kriyananda and also about Swami Kriyananda, because in this Kirtan this evening and in our stories and some readings that we'll share, we honor his life. His birthday, the literal anniversary of his birthday came a couple of days ago on the 19th of May. It would have been his 95th birthday. And he obviously had a surpassingly powerful influence on our lives personally, but also really on the world. And I think in many ways the world is still kind of coming to know that, because although he worked very hard to promote Yogananda's work, he himself did not sort of try to become a star guru in the world. He really was Yogananda's disciple for his entire adult life. And he made sure that we understood that. And so we'll talk a little bit about that, but mainly we'll share about his life. And the chants that we'll share this evening are ones that he wrote, I think almost exclusively, or if he didn't write the words, he wrote the melody. And so we'll share that together. There will be little pauses in between the chants, as we would often have in a kirtan. And those are designed to help us to experience the essence of the chant more deeply. You can think of this as a kind of deepening relationship or deepening connection with the divine. And the chants are each of them windows toward that. Just as when we meditate, we may practice one technique or another, or when we practice yoga postures, we may focus on one posture or another, or a series of postures, perhaps the inverted poses, or perhaps the sitting poses, whatever it may be. All of them are kind of windows into an experience of the divine. We'll look at that, tune into that with regard to each chant, because Swamiji wrote these from a very high state of consciousness. And we can tap into that as we chant and as we pause in between and kind of milk the vibration more deeply from each individual chant. So we'll begin now with a chant to the Divine Mother, who Swamiji worshipped very profoundly. Even in his last days of his life, he was planning yet another pilgrimage to a Divine Mother shrine in Europe. And so this is When I Awake, I'll see thy face. When I awake, I'll see thy light. Mother, awake me from my dreams. Mother, awake me in thy light. Hand in hand, we're dancing together in thy light.
And the second verse is, when I awake, I'll end all sorrows. When I awake, I'll know thy joy. And the third verse is, when I awake, I'll end all fear. When I awake, I'll find thy love.
When I awake, I'll see thy face. When I awake, I'll see thy light. When I awake, I'll see thy face. When I awake, I'll see thy light. Mother, awake me from my dreams. Mother, awake me in thy light. And in hand we're dancing together, Mother, awake me from my dreams. Mother, awake me in thy light. And in hand we're dancing together. When I awake, I'll end all sorrows. When I awake, I know thy joy. When I awake, I'll end all sorrows. When I awake, thy joy. Mother, awake me from my dreams. Mother, awake me in thy joy. And in hand we're dancing together, my joy. Mother, awake me from my dreams. Mother, awake me in thy joy. And in hand we're dancing together, my joy. When I awake, I'll end all fear. When I awake, I find thy love. When I awake, I'll end all fear. When I awake, I find thy love. Mother, awake me from my dreams. Mother, awake me in thy joy. And in hand we're dancing together in thy love. Mother, awake me from my dreams. Mother, awake me in thy love. And in hand we're dancing together in thy love. When I awake, I see thy face. When I awake, I see thy light. When I awake, I see thy face. When I awake, I see thy light. Mother, awake me from my dreams. Mother, awake me in thy light. And in hand we're dancing together in thy light. Mother, awake me from my dreams. Mother, awake me in thy light. And in hand we're dancing together in thy light. When I awake, I end all sorrows. When I awake, I know thy joy. When I awake, I end all sorrows. When I awake, I know farther away from my knees, farther away from love. And in we're dancing together, when I awake, I'll end of fear. When I awake, I'll feel thy love. When I awake, I'll end of fear. When I awake, I'll find thy love. Farther away from my knees, farther away from thy love. And in hand we're dancing together, in thy love. Farther away from my knees, farther away in thy love. And in hand we're dancing together in thy love. Farther away from my knees, farther away in thy love. And in hand we're dancing together in thy love. And in hand we're dancing together in thy love. This next chant is very simple in words, but very profound in vibrations. Sri Ram, Jai Ram. And we'll play a melody that I think Swamiji wrote.
No, it's an ancient,
This is the ancient
Indian
melody?
What?
This is the ancient melody, really?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, traditional melody. Okay. Well, then it was.
But he used the melody and wrote the Festival of Light song, Father, Mother, Friend, Our God, to the traditional melody. Father, Shri Ram, Jai Ram, Jai Jai Ram, 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 Shri Ram, Jai Ram, Jai Jai Ram,
So we'll sing one more chant and then we'll have a short meditation and we'll have some readings and some stories. So we'll sing another Indian one. We'll do Hare Hare Krishna. This is a melody that Swamiji wrote not terribly long before we moved there, actually. So we love to sing this in India. Hare Hare Krishna, Hare Hare, 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 Hare Hare Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Hare Krishna, Hare Hare, 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 Hare Hare Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Hare Krishna, Hare Hare, 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 Hare Hare Guru, Hare Hare, Hare Hare Guru, Hare Hare. Hare Hare Guru, Hare Hare, 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 Hare Hare Guru.
Hare Hare Krishna, 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 Hare Hare Guru, Hare 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 Guru, 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 Hare Hare Krishna, 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 Hare
Let's meditate for a few minutes. So we're going to sing a song of Swamiji's for you, which we don't typically do in kirtans, but given that it's a celebration of his birthday, and if we were doing this in person, we would probably have a whole concert lined up of his songs, but we'll at least sing one of them. So this is Song of the Nightingale. Just a sec here to get my tuning right.
Nightingale, nightingale, sing of joy through the night. Teach my heart to impart everywhere your delight. Sing of moon rays under rain, sing that love's not in vain. Every grief, every wrong has its ending in song. Nightingale, nightingale, sing of joy through the night. Teach all men how to spin clouds of gloom into light. Without silence, what is song? Without night, where is dawn? Were it not for men's woes, who would smile at our wrongs? Nightingale, nightingale, sing of joy through the night. Let each tone silence grow, earth and heaven unite. Morning laughter, evening tears, snow and blossoms all fade. Join us sing in the night, to face change unafraid. Nightingale, nightingale, nightingale.
So I will start with a couple of stories about Swami. And I think the most important thing about him was that he was fully a disciple of his guru. And everything that he did, everything that he accomplished, all the work that he did, and he was tirelessly working. I've never seen anything like the amount of sheer energy that he could put out. But it was all for Master, it was all for Guru. And he would tell us that we think of ourselves with all these self-definitions and accomplishments that we have had, education that we've received, things we've done, places we've been, all of our books that we've written, or whatever it is that we think of as who we are. And he said none of that is important. What's important for us as Ananda devotees is that we are disciples of a great master. And that is the definition of who we are. We are disciples of Paramhansa Yogananda. And Swami would say, whenever you're trying to figure something out, whenever you're trying to figure out what your direction should be, what to say in a particular situation, what to do, what to think, how to behave, he would say, it's very simple. Ask yourself, what would Yogananda do? And if we can imagine what Master would do in whatever situation it is, and try our best to do that, everything will work out for the best. We just have to remember to do that. We have to remember in the midst of difficulty and hardship or pain or whatever it is, we have to remember to ask that Yogananda come into that situation and guide us, guide our words, guide our behavior. And in that way, we will do the best that can be done in any situation. And so Swami always referred everything to Master. And it became so automatic that he didn't know where he himself ended and where Yogananda began. He had put his whole life, his whole feeling, thoughts, energy, everything into attuning himself to Yogananda. And if we can do that in whatever way we can, to whatever small degree we can, it will help us tremendously to strengthen our attunement, to be guided in the right way so that we can grow spiritually. We can be done with our karma. We can draw the grace that will dissolve the rest of our karma and we can be free. And so Swami was continually asking, continually drawing from that source of power, the divine power that is the Guru. And I remember something very sweet that happened. He was always praying in this way, always just trying to draw. And he was asked one time, can you compose a prayer that all of Ananda for this year could be saying? You know, we could each of us memorize this poem and put it on our altars or just repeat it every day as a way of uniting all of Ananda. Very sweet idea. And Swami said, you know, it's been such a long time since I've prayed with words. And I love that. That truly is the deepest prayer when there is no word for it. There's no verbalization. It's just the heart, soul, mind, consciousness, every part of our being just lifted up in aspiration to God. So maybe I will let Dharmadas now do a couple readings, and if there's time later, I will tell a couple more stories.
change the camera.
Okay. I'll be the camera person now.
So I'm going to read a couple little passages from Swamiji's book, The New Path. And this is his autobiography. And this is from the early stages of his life. And some weeks ago, about a month ago, almost, in fact, a month ago exactly today, we were commemorating the anniversary of his passing. And I mentioned on that night that we honor sort of his legacy on the anniversary of his passing. We honor his life on the anniversary of his birthday, and his discipleship on the anniversary of his discipleship to Yogananda in September. Of course, his discipleship is woven into his life, and it's kind of inextricably part of his being and his nature, and so we can't ever really separate that from him. But I wanted to focus a little on his life because there are some themes that showed up in the very early stages of his life that followed him all the way to the very last day. And they're just it's very sweet the way he describes this. So he's a young child, very young, and he writes, "As I grew a little older, my inner joy spilled over into an intense enthusiasm for life." And he's talking about his years in Romania growing up as a child. Teliagen, which is the town where he was, gave us many opportunities to be creative in our play. We were far removed from the modern world of frequent movies, circuses, and other contrived amusements. Television was, of course, unknown at that time, even in America. As a community composed mostly of English and American families, we were remote even from the mainstream Romanian culture. Our parents taught us a few standard Anglo-American games, but for the most part, we invented our own. Our backyard became transformed into adventure lands. A long stepladder laid sideways on the snow became an airplane soaring us to warmer climes. A large apple tree with hanging branches served a variety of useful functions: a schoolhouse, a seagoing schooner, a castle. Furniture piled high in various ways in the nursery would become a Spanish galleon or a mountain fortress. We blazed secret trails through a nearby cornfield to a cache of buried treasure, or to a point of safety from the pursuing officers of some unspeakably wicked tyrant. In winter, skating on a tennis court that had been flooded to make an ice rink, we gazed below us into the frozen depths and imagined ourselves moving freely in another dimension of wonderful shapes and colors. Leadership came naturally to me, though I was unwilling to exert it if others didn't spontaneously share my interests. I'm just going to pause there for a moment because right there, he just gave the essence of one of the verses of one of the most important songs that he ever wrote, called Walk Like a Man. Even though you walk alone, why court approval once the road is known? Let come who will, but if they all turn home, the goal still awaits you. Go on alone. The children in Teliagen did share my interests and enthusiastically embraced my ideas. More and more, however, as I grew older, I discovered that many people considered my view of things somewhat peculiar. I noticed it first in some of the newly arrived children in Teliagen. Accustomed as they were to the standard childhood games of England and America, they would look puzzled at my proposals for more imaginative entertainment, like the time we gazed into unfamiliar dimensions in the ice while skating over it. Unwilling to impose my interests on them, I was equally unwilling to accept their imposition in return. I was, I suppose, eccentric, not from any conscious desire or intent, but from a certain inability to attune myself to others' norms. What was important to me seemed to them unimportant, whereas frequently what they considered important seemed to me to be incomprehensible. And I'll just pause again there to say that was a theme that ran through Swamiji's entire life. And we can also perhaps notice it in our own lives a little bit, because I know for myself, even though Swamiji's life outwardly, for example, what I just read, his childhood in Romania, growing up speaking 5 languages, traveling back and forth across Europe, across the Atlantic, across America, and back and back and back. All of that was wildly different from my own upbringing. But I remember as I was working my way through the path, reading it for the first time in 1979, in the spring of 1979, I remember coming to the place where he met Yogananda and where he was asking the real driving questions of his life. And I remember thinking, these are he's telling my story. He's asking the same questions that I've been asking my whole life. And I was mesmerized. I was blown away by that sort of connection, that corollary in his life. And he never stopped asking those questions in a way. He was seeking truth pretty much from before he was born. And he was always trying to understand why. And I'll just read another brief passage here. Um, it's so sweet. He talks about his parents, and even though they did not always understand each other, um, it was just so dear the way they related to each other. And let's see if I can find this or if I lost it. Okay, here we go. My parents loved us children deeply. Their love for each other, too, was exemplary and a strong source of emotional security for us. Never in my life did I know them to quarrel or to have even the slightest falling out. This is astonishing. I will submit, just saying. My father was especially wonderful with children. Rather reserved by nature, he yet possessed a simple kindness and a sense of humor that enabled him to appreciate young minds. At bedtime, he would invent hilarious stories for us that were continued night after night, frequently with additions from his enthusiastic listeners. Then, as my brothers and I were ready to fall asleep, he would arrange us at one end of the bed or the other, depending on whether we said we wanted to sleep in Australia, America, or some other distant land. He taught us much by example as well as words. Above all, what we learned from him came from observing in him a nature always humble, honest, truthful, honorable, kind, and scrupulously fair. I would go so far as to call him, in his quiet, rather reserved way, a great man. But in my own relationship with him, there was always a certain sadness. I could not be to him the kind of mirror a man naturally hopes for in his sons, especially his firstborn. I tried earnestly to share his interests, but where he was attracted to the hows of things, I was attracted to the whys. He was a scientist, and I, instinctively, a mystic and a philosopher. He tried to interest me in the way things work. I still remember one dusty expedition under the house where he showed us boys what made the front doorbell ring. I at least tried to feel grateful, but I was only interested in what things meant. My inability to communicate with him on those subjects which most deeply interested each of us was the first indication I had that his world, which I considered by extension the normal world, could never truly be mine. Mother and I understood one another intuitively. Ours was a communication of souls, less so one of speech. Though she never spoke of praying for us children, I know that her prayers and love for me were my greatest blessing during the formative years of my life. I always appreciated how Swamiji understood the challenges of getting onto the path and how he had this beautiful foundation, but he also had to move beyond it. He also had to, in a sense, break away from this tight knit orbit of family. And I am continually impressed when I sort of contemplate his life from his earliest years and on, how challenging it was. Here he grew up in a wealthy home, in a wonderful, adventurous neighborhood. I mean, in many ways, his life and his family was charmed and blessed. I remember him saying that they were on the his father was on the boat to go to Europe when the stock market crashed, and he would have been laid off from his job. But because he was already en route to Europe, they couldn't really fire him or lay him off. He was going on to do a job that was going to turn into to become very profitable over there. So he was allowed to continue his employment, even in the 1930s when so many people were unemployed. And
They rerouted the boat.
well, and in later years, when World War II started, they were poised to move to Yugoslavia, and their belongings were all packed up from Romania to be shipped to Yugoslavia. And they were in America when the news came that Poland had been invaded, World War was beginning, or war in Europe was beginning, and Europe was not a safe place to be going. And so they ended up staying in New York. And they had the boat with their possessions rerouted, or they had their possessions rerouted by boat to America. And it sort of seamlessly flowed in this beautiful, harmonious way. And yet, for Swamiji personally, those years were very challenging because he got sent away at age 9 to Switzerland. He didn't know French. His teachers thought he was extraordinarily stupid, which, of course, he was extraordinarily intelligent, but he didn't know French, and so all the classes were in French. So naturally, he was behind all the other kids. Then he moved on to England, but he didn't have the English accent, which eventually he mastered. And then just in time when he was going to become the head boy of his class, that's when World War broke out and he stayed in America. So now he's in America, considered a foreigner, never mind that he was American by birth. And he had this funny English accent, which he then had to get rid of and sort of put on an American accent. And what he ended up with in life was a Kriyananda accent. He had his own accent, which was sort of neither American nor European nor English nor whatever. It was just his own. Very refined, very calm and centered and joyful. but he moved to his own rhythm. And that little bit in there about how he never wanted to impose his leadership on others who weren't interested, neither was he willing to have to be imposed upon by them. And so it naturally created this little bit of divide. And as he is writing this, and as I was reading it, I was reflecting in my own life how many times I've run into this. In fact, just a week or so ago, I had to make an unscheduled trip and was with a group of sort of relatives and friends of relatives, and we were talking. And in my family, especially the peripheral sides of my family, you throw a brick and you hit a missionary or a musician or both. It's just sort of all over the place. And so as I was talking to these people, they had spent 18 or 20 years in Ecuador, which I found very fascinating, and I was very curious about where they lived and what it was like and so on. And they asked, what I had been up to. I mentioned that we had spent nearly 10 years in India, and so they were curious, what mission were we part of? And so I described yoga and meditation in India, and it's like stunned silence. The conversation just stopped. They just did not know what to say. And we saw that with Swamiji too. It just, he had this wonderful way about him, but people just did not know what to make of him. And, he could relate to people when they understood or when they, were interested in yoga, but, and he caught the wave of yoga interest in the late 1960s, which was how, and the Back to the Land movement, which is how our Ananda communities were formed. But in many ways, he just had to move in his own way. And we came to relate to him very closely and to try to get in tune with his vision of the world. And it is extraordinarily uplifting, and it still animates and motivates all of what Ananda is. But I just was so touched and impressed by those themes. Started in his earliest childhood and continued on through his entire life. So maybe Nirmala can tell another story, but while we're waiting for her to resituate, I'll sing a little bit of that song. Walk like a man, even though you walk alone. Why court? I'm sorry, I'm going to do that over again, and I'm going to sing this with the guitar being mic'd so that people can actually hear the guitar. Walk like a man, even though you walk alone. Why court approval once the road is known? Let come who will, but if they all turn home, the goal still awaits you. Go on alone. Follow your dream, though it lead to worlds unknown. Life's but a shadow once our dreams have grown. What if men cry, your dream is not our own? Your soul knows the answer. Go on alone. Give life your heart, bless everything that's grown. Fear not the loving, all this world's your own. They reach the soil, but once the seed is sown, seek freedom, don't linger. Go on alone. Go on alone. Go on alone. Do you want to tell another story or no?
Okay. Do you want to change the camera a little bit then?
Sure.
Well, as many of you probably remember, Dharmadas and I worked for about 10 years in Crystal Clarity, which is Swami Kriyananda's publishing house that published all of his books and music albums. And so I did design work, and Dharmadas did typesetting and production work on these products. So the way it would usually work is that both Swami and I would think, sort of conceptualize from his title what the graphics would look like. And oftentimes he would have something in his mind. And then I would try to translate what he was telling me into pictures. And one time it was often challenging, but the cover for Education for Life, was it Education? No, it wasn't Education for Life. It was another one. Anyway,
Art is a hidden message.
Art is a hidden message. He wanted an upside down pyramid underwater, resting on its point, and many other interesting concepts. So I had to try to create these things. Anyway, for the Hindu way of awakening, he wanted Shiva on the cover. And my concept of Shiva was perfectly visualized in one of Swami's slides, because that's part of what he wanted me to do, was utilize his photography that he'd done. And so there was one that was, in my mind, perfect for Shiva. It was a vast panoramic sunset with roiling clouds and these beautiful reds and purples and oranges, just this magnificent, impactful sky. And it just seemed perfect to me. So I worked something up and I brought it to Swami, and he said, "Oh, no, that's not at all Shiva." And I was so shocked, because no, that's the Shiva that I know and love. But what he envisioned was what we eventually came to, and it was a, a photograph of a beautiful bronze Nataraja, which is Shiva, the dance of destruction. So he has many arms, and he's standing on one leg. He's the dancer. And, and Dharmadas is bringing the cover. There it is. And that beautiful cloud was what Swami had envisioned around Shiva in a beautiful blue background, sort of an infinity of blue around Shiva. And I learned so much just by tuning my original vision to what Swami was seeing. And I realized through this experience that it was a great learning process for me because it tuned me into the stillness that is Shiva, the vastness, the infinity of it. And what I had in my mind was outward and spectacular, and what Swami had was very deep. So it was truly fascinating working with him and doing all of that. But I just wanted to tell, do I have time for one more story? One story that is sort of, to me, indicative of his offbeat sense of humor and just the way he could sometimes speak in riddles that you just I was so taken aback on so many occasions, not just with this Shiva idea of the book cover, but so many ways he was just bigger and more interesting than anything I could think of. So this little incident was just a day when the three of us had been working on these projects tirelessly, but we were starting to get a little tired. And Swami suggested that the three of us go into Nevada City and just relax a little bit, go to a bookstore, have a coffee, just sort of play a little bit. Well, this was one of the first times that we'd ever done this, and I was a little concerned about just making small talk. I was used to talking about work. Work I can talk about, but just frivolous conversation I'm not that great at. So we went to a little cafe. Dharmadas went up to the counter to get us coffees. And so Swami and I found a table and we were sitting there, and I started talking about work. And Swami didn't say anything, but he reached over. I'm going to use a Kleenex. He picked up a napkin and he sort of folded it up a little bit. And I'm talking and he's playing with this napkin. And I started sort of slowing down when I saw he wasn't saying anything, and he finished with his napkin, and then he said, "You must pay the rent." "I can't pay the rent." "You must pay the rent." "But I can't pay the rent." "I'll pay the rent." I looked at him completely blankly. I had no idea what he was doing. I must have just stared at him. And then I realized that he was, doing the little melodrama from the early 20th century where the evil villain has a mustache. That was the Kleenex, was a mustache. And the damsel in distress had the little bow in her hair, and the hero had the bow tie. And I realized that he was trying to tell me that this was not the time to talk about work. This is the time to relax. So after looking at him blankly, I said, Swami, would you like a croissant? And he said, yes, I would. And so I got up and got him a croissant.
Oh, that's priceless.
But
Oh my God.
I tell that story, my own disadvantage at being so slow on the uptake there. But I tell you that story to give you an idea of the human dimension of Swami. He was a delightful human being. His nephew often came to Ananda in those days, and Swami was very fond of his nephew. And he, Dave, would tell us just how wonderful Uncle Don was when they were children and how much fun he was and just what a delight to be around. And that was always the case with Swami. He was very challenging to be around, very intense to keep up with, very, very intense. And I often would think, if Swami is like this, what master must have been like to be around? It's stunning to contemplate. And I think, we all have to up our game and become more and more energetic and more magnetic to help us to cope with that. We have new Kriya bonds coming up and in training to take Kriya initiation. And we said to them the other night at the class series, you have to have techniques and deepen your meditation to strengthen your nervous system to be able to deal with the energy that can come up through Kriya Yoga. So it's very important that we practice our meditation techniques and get our energy higher and more magnetic. And just to be around these great souls is an incredible blessing. Someone sent me a little video of Swami's time in India, and it was delightful to see Swami, to hear his voice, to hear his words. And there is so much of him on video. Dharmadas and I interviewed him in his last video series, Ask Me About Truth, 108 episodes of that series. He did 3 different television series in India, 365 episodes each. His talks were videotaped for decades. And before that, his talks were audio taped and recorded for decades. We still have reel to reel tape from some of those early talks. There is a tremendous amount of footage, of resources to tune into Swami. 140 books, is it?
Yeah.
And 400 pieces of music. It just goes on and on and on. And all the photographs that he took, it's a tremendous body of work. And it's all there for you. That's what he did it for. He didn't do it because he wanted to preserve the sound of his own voice. He did it so that we could tune in and share in that vibration. The first few years that I was at Ananda, I didn't get to see him hardly at all. we went on a tour, a small group of singers with Swami in 1979. And from then, I got to be around him more and more. But in those early years, I remember I was working for the earliest iteration of Ananda construction, and I was making stained glass windows. And I had a big workshop where I could work on very large pieces. And so I worked alone pretty much, you know. Um, the guys were around some, but they were off doing projects. And I would play Swami's cassette tapes on a cassette player endlessly. All day long, I would play those tapes, listening to his voice, hearing the stories, absorbing the teachings every day. It was a priceless opportunity, and I really encourage you to tune in to the vast amount of resource that there is for you. And the interesting thing is that I can listen to those tapes from the 70s, and they are just as relevant today in 2021 as they ever were then, because human life is the same. No matter if we live in the little age of melodrama, early 20th century, or in the flower children of the 60s, and the pandemic year now of 2020 and the rest of 2021, as we get out of the pandemic, ancient wisdom is always true. It's not as though truth changes. It's not as though politics changes truth. Truth is one, and truth is eternal. Swami ended one of his public talks, I think it was in Pacific Palisades many years ago, with those words. And that I've always been struck by that. It's very, very powerful. And if we tune into that wisdom, we will grow, we will change, we will draw the grace to release all of our karma.
So we'll chant now. We'll sing another couple chants here. And this is I want only thee, Lord, thee, only thee.
I want only Lord, Thee only. 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 I want only Thee, Lord, Thee only. I want only Thee, Lord, Thee only. I want only Thee. I want only Thee, Lord, Thee only. I want only I want
We'll sing a chant that we very seldom do. This was a chant that someone requested Swamiji write, and the words were words that she found inspiring. She may have written them herself, but she wanted a melody for them, and so she gave them to Swami, and he obliged her by writing a melody for it. And the chant is called "I Am But an Empty Vessel."
I am but an empty vessel, empty vessel, empty vessel. I am but an empty vessel, filled with the presence of God. Oh, filled with the presence of God. I am love, I am joy, I am but an empty vessel, empty vessel, empty vessel. I am but an empty vessel, filled with the presence of God. Oh, filled with the presence of God. I am love, I am joy, I am one empty vessel, empty vessel, empty vessel. I am one empty vessel, filled with the presence of God. Oh, filled with the presence of God. I am love, I am joy, I am but an empty vessel, empty vessel, empty vessel. I am but an empty vessel, filled with the presence of God. Oh, filled with the presence of God. I am love, I am joy. I am but an empty vessel, empty vessel, empty vessel. I am but an empty vessel, filled with the presence of God. Oh, filled with the presence of God. I am love, I am joy. I am love, I am
As I've invited you to tune into all the resources available to feel Swami's vibration, to spend time with him, to get to know him, his sense of humor, his joy, his boundless enthusiasm. Let's open our hearts now by chanting Om together and send him your gratitude, your love, your openness and receptivity, and feel his presence coming through to fill your mind, your heart, with his loving, deeply sensitive, deeply attuned, master to master vibration. So let's rub our hands together now. Feel the energy in the hands and send him your love and receive and return through the power of Om his loving vibration.
Om, peace. Amen. Jai Guru, Jai Swamiji. God bless you all.